7 governesses fled Blackthorne Hall in 18 months. The children were that wild, the Earl that broken. But when Rosalind Whitford walked through those gates, she saw what no one else did. 2 children weren't destroying their father's house. They were screaming for his attention in the only language grief had left them. And the moment she said that out loud, the scarred Earl standing in the doorway looked at her like she'd just cracked open his chest and named every secret he'd buried with his dead wife. But here's what terrified her most. She felt it too, that dangerous pull, and she had no idea that healing his family would mean igniting a desire so forbidden it could destroy them all. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video, subscribe to Duke's Royal Library, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I want to know how far Rosalind's journey has traveled. Rosalind Whitford had learned early that survival required 3 things: a sharp mind, an iron will, and the ability to become invisible when necessary. At 36, she was considered well past marriageable age. Too old to attract suitors, too educated to be properly submissive, and far too poor to overcome either disadvantage. The daughter of a country solicitor who died leaving more debts than assets, Rosalind had taken the only path available to women of her class and circumstance. She became a governess. For 8 years, she had moved through England's better households like a ghost, teaching, disciplining, nurturing children who would never remember her name once they'd grown. She belonged nowhere, claimed by no one, existing in the peculiar limbo between servant and family. But she had become very good at reading people, at seeing past the masks they wore to the truths they tried to hide. And the advertisement for Blackthorne Hall had practically screamed its truths between every carefully chosen word. Governess required immediately. 2 children, ages 7 and 9, must possess exceptional patience, firm resolve, and unshakable constitution. Previous candidates need not reapply. Salary, £8,000 per annum. £8,000, nearly 10 times the standard rate. That alone told Rosalind everything she needed to know. These children were not merely difficult. They were desperate. And so was their father. The journey north to Yorkshire had taken 3 days, each mile carrying her further from the disappointment of her last position. A merchant's family in Bath who dismissed her when the eldest son had made inappropriate advances and blamed her for encouraging him. Never mind that she'd rejected him. Never mind that she'd done nothing wrong. In the world of governesses, blame always flowed downward. When the hired coach had finally deposited her in the village of Blackthorne on the moor, the innkeeper's wife had clutched her rosary and whispered warnings. "That place is cursed, miss." The countess died there 3 years past, thrown from her horse right in front of the children. They say the Earl hasn't been right since. And those poor babes. She'd shaken her head. "Wild as animals now. You seem a sensible lass. Turn back while you can." But Rosalind had nowhere to turn back to. Now, standing in the entrance hall of Blackthorne Hall, she understood why so many women had fled. The house was magnificent. Soaring ceilings, ornate moldings, portraits of stern ancestors glaring from every wall. But it felt abandoned, as if the people who lived here were merely ghosts haunting rooms that had forgotten how to be homes. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light. The air smelled of beeswax and something else. Decay, perhaps, or simply sorrow left to fester. Mrs. Bellamy, the housekeeper, was a rail-thin woman with gray hair pulled so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. "You're the new one, then," she said, her tone suggesting Rosalind's failure was already a foregone conclusion. "I'll show you to your room. His lordship will see you after you've settled." "Actually," Rosalind said, setting down her battered valise, "I'd prefer to meet the children first, if that's possible." Mrs. Bellamy's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "The children? Miss Whitford, I'd advise you to prepare yourself properly before." A tremendous crash echoed from somewhere above, followed by shouting and what sounded distinctly like breaking glass. Mrs. Bellamy closed her eyes as if praying for patience. "That would be them now." "Perfect," Rosalind said, already moving toward the stairs. "Which floor?" "Second. East wing." "But Miss Whitford, you should wait for." Rosalind was already climbing. She found them in what had once been a music room. A boy, dark-haired, sharp-featured, with his father's intense eyes, stood atop the pianoforte, wielding a fireplace poker like a sword. His sister, younger and golden-haired, had somehow managed to tie a footman to a chair using what appeared to be expensive drapery cords. The footman looked mortified. The children looked triumphant. And in the midst of the chaos, Rosalind felt something unexpected: recognition. These weren't monsters. They were survivors. Pirates again, she said mildly, stepping into the room. Both children froze. The boy, Rowan, she presumed, lowered his poker slightly. Who are you? Rosalind Whitford, your new governess. She surveyed the destruction with interest rather than horror. Though I must say, your technique needs work. Real pirates would have secured the prisoner's arms behind the chair, not in front. He could easily reach the knots. The girl, Kit, stared at her with wide blue eyes. You're not angry? Should I be? You're clearly reenacting a scene. Let me guess. Treasure Island? Or perhaps something more historically accurate. Rowan's expression shifted from defiance to cautious interest. You've read Treasure Island? Read it? I practically memorized it. Though I always thought Jim Hawkins made several tactical errors that a smarter protagonist would have avoided. Like what? Rowan challenged. Well, for one, he trusted Long John Silver far too long. The warning signs were obvious from the beginning. That's what I said, Rowan exclaimed, momentarily forgetting his rebellion. But Kit thought. I thought Jim was being kind, Kit interrupted, releasing the footman's bonds. Is it wrong to give people second chances? Rosalind knelt, so she was eye level with the child. It's not wrong to be kind, Kit. But kindness should never mean ignoring danger. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is see people clearly, including the parts they'd rather keep hidden. Kit's lower lip trembled. Like how Papa doesn't see us anymore? The question landed like a blow. Rosalind saw the pain beneath the child's words, the desperate need for attention that had manifested in chaos. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the room like a blade. What is going on here? Adrian Blackthorne filled the doorway. And that was the only way to describe his presence. He didn't simply enter a room. He dominated it. Tall, powerfully built, with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His face would have been handsome if not for the deep scar running from his left temple to his jaw, and the expression of barely controlled fury that hardened every feature. His eyes, dark, storm-cloud gray, fixed on Rosalind with an intensity that made her breath catch. I asked a question, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Who are you, and why are my children destroying my house? Rosalind rose slowly, refusing to be intimidated. Rosalind Whitford, my lord, your new governess. And they're not destroying your house. They're asking for your attention in the only language they think you'll understand. The silence that followed was arctic. Miss Whitford, he said, each word precisely clipped. You have been in my employ for approximately 10 minutes. I would suggest you refrain from psychoanalyzing my relationship with my children until you've actually managed to perform the duties for which you were hired. With respect, my lord, I was hired to educate your children. But education requires understanding. And understanding requires seeing what's actually happening, not just what appears to be happening. His eyes narrowed. And what, in your expert opinion, is actually happening? Rosalind glanced at Rowan and Kit, who were watching this exchange with wide eyes. Your children are brilliant, creative, and desperately sad. They've learned that misbehavior is the only way to penetrate your grief long enough to remember they exist. So they give you what you seem to expect, chaos. It's not ideal, but it's better than being invisible. For a long moment, the Earl simply stared at her. Rosalind saw the war playing out across his features. Fury at her presumption, recognition of uncomfortable truth, and beneath it all, a grief so profound it threatened to pull him under. Get out, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Rosalind's heart sank. She'd overstepped, gambled, and lost. But then he added, all of you. Mrs. Bellamy will show you to the nursery. We will discuss this further at dinner. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a reprieve. As Rosalind ushered the children from the room, she caught one more glimpse of the Earl. He'd turned toward the window, his shoulders rigid, one hand braced against the frame as if he needed it to remain standing. And in that moment, Rosalind understood. Adrian Blackthorne wasn't cold. He was drowning. And whether he knew it yet or not, she'd just thrown him a lifeline. Dinner at Blackthorne Hall was a study in carefully maintained distance. Rosalind had been instructed to take her meals in the nursery with the children. Proper governesses did not dine with the family. But at 7 o'clock precisely, a footman appeared with a summons. His lordship required her presence in the dining room. Immediately. She'd changed into her only decent dinner dress, a plain gray wool that had seen better seasons, and followed the footman through corridors that seemed to grow darker and more oppressive with every turn. The dining room was absurdly grand for a meal between two people. A table that could seat 20 stretched between them like a battlefield. The Earl sat at the head, she at the far end, with an acre of polished mahogany and uncomfortable silence between them. He'd changed as well, into formal evening wear that emphasized his powerful frame and aristocratic bearing. In the candlelight, his scar looked less like a disfigurement and more like a brand, evidence of survival, of a battle fought and somehow won. "Miss Whitford," he began, once the first course had been served and the servants dismissed, "I owe you an apology." Rosalind nearly dropped her spoon. "My lord, this afternoon I was harsh. You touched on truths I prefer not to examine, and I responded poorly. That was unfair to you. I also overstepped," Rosalind admitted. "I've been in your home less than a day. I had no right to presume. You had every right." He cut her off, his voice rough. "7 governesses, Miss Whitford. 7 women who took one look at my children and decided they were too difficult, too damaged, too much trouble. You've been here 4 hours, and you're the first to see them as children rather than problems to be solved." He paused, his jaw working as if the next words physically pained him. "You're also the first person to say aloud what I've been too much of a coward to admit. I have failed my children. I have been so consumed by my own grief that I've abandoned them to theirs." Rosalind set down her spoon carefully. "Grief doesn't make you a coward, my lord. It makes you human, does it?" His laugh was bitter. "Tell that to Rowan, who hasn't smiled in 3 years. Tell it to Kit, who still sets a place for her mother at the children's tea table because she can't accept that she's gone." The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. Rosalind felt it like a physical thing. This man's enormous capacity for love turned inward, becoming a weapon against himself. "How did she die?" Rosalind asked gently. "If you don't mind my asking." "A riding accident." The words came out flat, rehearsed. 3 years ago this December. A fox startled her mare. Louisa was an excellent rider, but... He stopped, his hand clenching around his wine glass. "The children saw it happen. Rowan tried to catch her. He was only 6, but he ran. God, he ran so fast. But he couldn't. He didn't finish. He didn't need to." "And you?" Rosalind asked. "Where were you?" His eyes met hers, and she saw it. The guilt that had been eating him alive. "London. At Parliament. Attending to important estate business that couldn't wait." The self-loathing in his voice was corrosive. "I arrived home to find my wife dead and my children shattered. I couldn't save her. I couldn't comfort them. I couldn't even." He stopped, struggling for control. "I couldn't look at them without seeing her. So I stopped looking." Rosalind's throat tightened. "That's not failure, my lord. That's trauma. You lost your wife. Your children lost their mother. But more than that, they almost lost their father too." "Almost," he said bitterly. "Miss Whitford, I think it's clear they did lose me. The man I was died with Louisa." "No." Rosalind's voice was firm. "The man you were is in hibernation. There's a difference. And your children need you to wake up." The Earl stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Why did you come here, Miss Whitford?" "Truly? The salary." "Partially," she admitted. "But also because the advertisement was clearly written by someone desperate. And I understand desperation. I understand what it feels like to be invisible, to not belong anywhere, to wonder if anyone would notice if you simply disappeared. Your children are living that reality right now. And I thought, perhaps I could help." "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect? Someone older, severe, battle-hardened." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not a woman young enough to be mistaken for a governess and clever enough to see through carefully constructed walls in less than a day." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm 26, my lord. Hardly young. And as for seeing through walls..." She met his gaze steadily. "Some walls are only impressive from a distance. Up close, you can see all the cracks." Something shifted in his expression, awareness, perhaps, or recognition. For the first time since she'd arrived, he truly looked at her. Not as a governess, not as an employee, but as a woman. And Rosalind felt that look everywhere. "Tell me about them," he said finally. "My children. What did you observe today?" So she did. She told him about Rowan's intelligence, his strategic mind, his desperate need for structure and purpose. About Kit's creativity, her sensitivity, her habit of nurturing injured creatures because she herself felt wounded. About how they protected each other, covered for each other, loved each other fiercely because they'd learned they couldn't count on anyone else. The Earl listened with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "They're extraordinary," Rosalind concluded. "Difficult, yes. Hurting, absolutely. But extraordinary nonetheless. They just need someone to believe in them again. And you believe in them?" "I do. After 4 hours?" "Sometimes that's all it takes. To see someone. To truly see them." The air between them felt charged, as if lightning were about to strike. The Earl opened his mouth to respond, and a scream shattered the moment. Kit's scream. They both moved instantly, racing from the dining room toward the sound. The Earl reached the stairs first, taking them 3 at a time, with Rosalind lifting her skirts and running close behind. They found Kit in the nursery, sobbing over a small box. Inside was a hedgehog, one of her rescued creatures, clearly dead. "He was fine this morning," Kit wailed as her father swept her into his arms. "I fed him, and he was fine, and now he's gone, and it's my fault, and—" "Shoo," the Earl murmured, his voice breaking. "It's not your fault, darling. Sometimes creatures die, and there's nothing we can do. Like Mama." The question stopped him cold. Rosalind saw the exact moment his composure cracked, saw 3 years of carefully contained grief threaten to spill over. "Yes," he whispered, his arms tightening around his daughter. "Like Mama. I miss her, Papa. I miss her so much. I know. God, I know. I miss her too." And then, finally, he broke. The Earl of Blackthorne sat on the nursery floor with his daughter in his arms and wept. Great, shuddering sobs that seemed to tear from somewhere deep and broken. Rowan appeared in the doorway, took one look, and threw himself at his father, clinging to him with the desperation of a child who'd been drowning and had finally been thrown a rope. Rosalind backed toward the door, but the Earl's voice stopped her. "Stay." So she did. She sat with them as they grieved together for the first time, this shattered family finally allowing themselves to feel the enormity of their loss. Mrs. Bellamy appeared with tea and blankets. The household staff kept a respectful distance. And through it all, Rosalind simply bore witness, offering silent support to a family learning how to be broken together instead of alone. Hours later, after the children had finally fallen asleep in their father's arms and he'd carried them to their beds, the Earl found Rosalind in the hallway. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, but also somehow lighter, as if a burden he'd carried for 3 years had finally been set down. "Thank you," he said simply. "I didn't do anything, my lord. You saw us. You stayed. That's everything." He paused, then added quietly, "My name is Adrian. And I think perhaps we've moved beyond formality, haven't we?" Rosalind's heart stuttered. "Adrian," she repeated, testing the name. It felt dangerous, intimate. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'd like to join the children's lessons. If that's acceptable to you. I've missed 3 years. I don't intend to miss any more. Of course." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Rosalind." The sound of her name in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "Yes, you were right. About everything. I have been drowning. But tonight." His eyes met hers in the dim hallway light. "Tonight, I remembered how to breathe." And then he was gone, leaving Rosalind alone in the darkness, her heart racing, her mind reeling, and her carefully constructed professional distance in absolute ruins. Because somewhere between afternoon chaos and midnight grief, something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed, and Rosalind suspected that nothing at Blackthorne Hall would ever be the same. The memory came to Rosalind unbidden as she stood in the portrait gallery, staring at the painting of Adrian's late wife. It had been 3 weeks into her tenure at Blackthorne Hall when Rowan had finally tested her properly. He'd hidden all her lesson books and declared he wouldn't study with a woman who'd be gone within a month like all the others. Instead of anger, Rosalind had sat on the schoolroom floor and said simply, "Then teach me something instead." He'd stared at her, confused, defensive. "What could I possibly teach you?" "Everything," she told him. About his mother, about what Blackthorne had been like before grief consumed it, about the boy he'd been when laughter still lived in these halls. And Rowan had broken, spilling 3 years of carefully contained memories while Rosalind listened and wept with him. The next morning, her lesson books had reappeared, stacked neatly on her desk. Kit's test had been different, crueler in its innocence. She'd asked Rosalind to braid her hair exactly as her mother had done, then screamed that it was wrong, all wrong, that Rosalind could never replace her. Rosalind hadn't tried to. Instead, she'd taught Kit a completely different braid, something uniquely theirs, and told the child that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone lost. Adrian had witnessed that moment from the doorway, though Rosalind hadn't known it then. Later, he told her it was the first time he'd understood that healing didn't require erasure, that his children could love again without betraying their mother's memory, that perhaps he could too. The thought made Rosalind's chest tighten even now, years later, standing in her position as Countess with everything she'd fought for suddenly feeling fragile as spun glass. Lady Beatrice Blackthorne arrived at their London townhouse without invitation, her presence announced by the disapproving sniff she gave upon entering the drawing room. Adrian's aunt had never approved of the marriage, though she'd been too well-bred to say so directly until now. "Rosalind," she said, the name delivered like an insult wrapped in silk. "Still playing Lady of the Manor, I see." Beside her stood Lady Maren Ellingford, a widow of impeccable breeding and substantial fortune who'd been angling for Adrian's attention since before Louise's death. She was beautiful in that cold, porcelain way that spoke of generations of careful breeding, all ice-blonde hair and Arctic blue eyes that assessed Rosalind like a stain on expensive fabric. "Your Grace," Maren said, the honorific delivered with just enough emphasis to suggest it didn't quite fit. "We've come to discuss the ball next month. Several families have expressed concern about attending an event hosted by—" She paused delicately. "Well, hosted by someone of your particular background." Rosalind felt the familiar heat of shame rise in her throat, but forced it down. She was the Countess of Blackthorne. She'd earned this position through love and loyalty, not birth. "My background," she said evenly, "includes 8 years of impeccable service, an education superior to most of my peers, and the devotion of my husband and children. If that troubles certain families, they're welcome to decline the invitation." Lady Beatrice's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "My dear girl, they will decline. And Adrian's reputation will suffer for it. Is that what you want? To drag this family's name through the mud because you refuse to acknowledge your limitations?" The words struck deep, finding every insecurity Rosalind had tried to bury. Because the truth was, she did worry. Every day, that she wasn't enough, that she'd never be enough, that Adrian would one day wake up and realize he'd traded the perfect aristocratic wife for the governess who'd gotten above herself. The letter lay on Adrian's desk like a coiled serpent, and Rosalind's hands trembled as she read it. The handwriting was unmistakably his, the words devastating in their clarity. "I have consulted with my solicitors regarding the matter we discussed. An annulment would be simplest, given the circumstances of our marriage. Lady Maren has expressed willingness to wait a reasonable period before any announcement." Rosalind's vision blurred. An annulment? As if their marriage, their love, the family they'd built, could simply be erased. As if she'd been nothing more than a mistake requiring correction. The memory rose unbidden. That night 4 years ago in his study at Blackthorne Hall, when everything between them had finally ignited. She'd been working late, organizing the children's lessons for the following week, when Adrian had appeared in the doorway. He'd been drinking, though not heavily. Just enough to loosen the iron control he maintained over himself. "I can't stop thinking about you," he'd said, the confession torn from him like a wound. "It's wrong, I know. You're in my employ. I'm barely recovered from Louise's death. But Rosalind, every time you smile at my children, every time you challenge me, every time you exist in my space, I want." He'd crossed to her then, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted the hunger in his eyes. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this is madness." Instead, she'd kissed him, and the world had caught fire. Now, standing in that same study with evidence of his betrayal in her hands, Rosalind felt that fire turn to ash. She'd known this day might come. The governess who'd gotten too comfortable in her borrowed life. The cautionary tale waiting to happen. She should have been more careful. Should have remembered her place. "Dear friends of Duke's Royal Library, I need to pause here and ask for your help. Creating these stories, these hours of research, writing, and emotional investment, is my passion, but it only continues if you help me reach more people. We're so close to 5,000 subscribers, and I'm asking you to help us get there in the next 2 days. It takes just 1 second to click that subscribe button, but it means the world to me. If this story has touched you, if Rosalind's struggle has made you feel something, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves romantic historical dramas. Every single subscription tells me that these stories matter, that you want more. Help me reach 5,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you the tales that make your heart race. I'm counting on you. Now, let's continue with Rosalind's story. Adrian found her in their chambers, the letter clutched in her white-knuckled grip, her face a mask of barely controlled devastation. "What is this?" Her voice was steady, but he heard the fracture beneath it. He glanced at the paper, and something flickered across his face. Confusion? Guilt? "Rosalind, where did you find that?" "On your desk, where you apparently left it for me to discover." She laughed, the sound brittle. "Was this your plan all along? Marry the grateful governess, use her to heal your children, then trade her in for someone suitable once the difficult work was done?" "What?" "No." He moved toward her, but she stepped back. "That letter isn't what you think." "Then explain it. Explain why you're discussing annulment with solicitors. Explain why Lady Marin is apparently waiting in the wings for me to be conveniently erased." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You're jumping to conclusions." "Am I?" Rosalind's composure finally cracked. "Because from where I stand, it seems quite clear. You've realized I don't fit in your world. That I never will. That marrying me was a beautiful mistake made in the aftermath of grief, and now that you're whole again, you need someone appropriate. Someone like Marin Ellingford, who was born knowing which fork to use and how to curtsy to a duchess. This isn't about you not fitting," Adrian said, his voice rising. "This is about you changing. You've become obsessed with society's opinion, with being perfect, with proving yourself to people whose approval means nothing. The woman I married didn't care what Lady Beatrice thought. She cared about what was right." The accusation struck like a physical blow. "I've had to care," Rosalind shot back. "Because every mistake I make reflects on you, on Rowan, on Kit. Because your world is watching, waiting for me to fail so they can say they knew all along that the governess wasn't good enough." They stared at each other across a chasm that had opened without either realizing it, both wounded, both afraid, both absolutely wrong about what the other was thinking. The Devonshire Ball was the event of the season, and Rosalind had prepared for it like a soldier preparing for battle. Her gown was exquisite, deep emerald silk that complemented her coloring without being ostentatious. Her hair was arranged perfectly, her jewelry understated. She looked every inch a countess. But as she moved through the glittering ballroom on Adrian's arm, she felt the weight of judgment pressing down like a physical thing. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Then Lady Beatrice approached with Lady Marin, their smiles sharp as knives. "Rosalind, how lovely you look," Beatrice said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Tell me, is it true you were going to be dismissed from your previous position for inappropriate conduct with the master's son?" The lie detonated in the ballroom like a bomb. Rosalind felt every eye turn toward her, saw the speculation ignite. "That's not," she began, but Marin cut her off smoothly. "And Adrian, dear, I've been meaning to mention. Several members of Parliament have expressed concern about your wife's influence on policy discussions. A former governess offering opinions on matters of state? It's rather presumptuous, don't you think?" The attack was masterful, designed to humiliate Rosalind while positioning Adrian as the victim of poor judgment. Around them, the ton watched with barely concealed fascination, waiting to see how the Earl of Blackthorne would respond to his wife being publicly gutted. Rosalind felt her carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. Every fear, every insecurity, every moment of feeling like an imposter crashed over her. She'd fought so hard to belong here, and in one moment, it had all been revealed as the fantasy it was. She was still just the governess. She always would be. Adrian's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. "Aunt Beatrice, I'm going to say this once, and I suggest you listen carefully." His tone was lethal, controlled fury barely leashed. "My wife's previous employment ended because her employer died, not because of any misconduct. The fact that you would spread such malicious lies tells me everything I need to know about your character. As for her opinions on policy, she's more intelligent than half the men in Parliament, and I value her counsel above almost anyone's. So if you have concerns about my wife's influence, I suggest you direct them to me. Because I am the one who seeks her advice. I am the one who trusts her judgment. And I am the one who will not tolerate anyone, family or otherwise, attempting to humiliate her in public. He turned to the assembled crowd, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. The Countess of Blackthorne is the finest woman I've ever known. She saved my children. She saved me. And if anyone in this room has a problem with that, I invite you to take it up with me directly. Now, if you'll excuse us. He offered Rosalind his arm and escorted her from the ballroom, leaving shocked silence in their wake. In the carriage, Rosalind finally broke. The letter was a forgery, Adrian said, his voice rough. I discovered it this morning. My aunt and Lady Marin staged the entire thing, hoping to drive us apart. Rosalind, I would never. He pulled her into his arms, his control shattering. I'm terrified every single day that you'll realize you made a mistake. That you'll wake up and see that I'm still that broken man you found drowning in grief. That I can never give you the life you deserve. That I'm not worthy of the gift you've given me. Rosalind stared at him, tears streaming down her face. You think you're not worthy? Adrian, I'm terrified that I'm not enough. That one day you'll see that I'm still just the governess playing at being a countess, that I'll never truly belong in your world. They looked at each other, and suddenly the absurdity of it struck them both. Here they were, two people desperately in love, nearly destroyed by fear of not being enough for the other. You're everything, Adrian whispered. You always have been, and I'm done letting anyone make you doubt that, including me. The morning after the ball, Rosalind did something she'd never allowed herself to do before. She stopped trying to be perfect. She stopped trying to prove she belonged. And she started thinking like the woman who'd walked into Blackthorne Hall 4 years ago, the woman who'd seen through walls and refused to accept convenient lies. The forged letter had been too perfect, the timing too convenient. Someone had access to Adrian's study, to his personal stationery, and to enough knowledge of his handwriting to create a convincing forgery. Someone who knew exactly which fears to exploit. Rosalind spent the morning methodically interviewing staff, checking records, and following the thread of evidence that everyone else had been too distracted to see. By noon, she had her answer. By 2 o'clock, she was standing in Lady Beatrice's drawing room with Adrian beside her and a leather portfolio of evidence in her hands. Lady Beatrice and Lady Marin looked up from their tea, surprise flickering across their faces before being smoothed into polite masks. Rosalind, Beatrice said coolly, I didn't expect to see you so soon after last night's unpleasantness. I imagine you didn't, Rosalind replied, setting the portfolio on the table between them. Tell me, how long have you been embezzling from the Blackthorne estate accounts? 3 years. 4. The color drained from Beatrice's face. Marin's teacup rattled against its saucer. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? Rosalind opened the portfolio, spreading documents across the expensive mahogany. These are records from the estate ledgers. Small discrepancies, barely noticeable individually, but they add up to nearly £15,000 diverted to accounts controlled by you and Lady Marin. You've been bleeding the estate dry while Adrian was consumed by grief, assuming he'd never notice. Assuming no one would notice. Adrian's voice was ice. When did you discover this? 2 months ago, Rosalind admitted. I've been gathering evidence since then. I wanted to be certain before I brought it to you. She turned back to Beatrice. The forged letter was meant to destabilize our marriage, to make Adrian question his judgment. If you could convince him he'd made a mistake marrying me, you could position Marin as the suitable replacement, a woman who would be too grateful for the title to look too closely at the finances. But you underestimated something fundamental. And what's that? Beatrice spat, her composure finally cracking. That I'm not the timid governess anymore. I'm the Countess of Blackthorne, and I protect what's mine. Rosalind's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. You have 2 choices. You can return every penny you've stolen and disappear from our lives permanently, or I can have you arrested and tried for fraud. The scandal would be enormous, of course. The Blackthorne name would suffer. But unlike you, I'm willing to endure scandal if it means protecting my family. Lady Marin stood abruptly. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. I have testimony from the bank manager, correspondence between you and Beatrice discussing the accounts, and a handwriting expert prepared to testify that the forged letter matches samples from your private secretary, Beatrice. The case is airtight. Adrian moved to stand beside his wife, his hands settling at the small of her back. You have until tomorrow morning to provide proof of repayment. After that, I'll have my solicitors proceed with criminal charges. Now get out of my sight. They left in disgrace, the empire of lies they'd constructed crumbling around them. In the carriage home, Adrian pulled Rosalind into his arms. You've been investigating this for 2 months and never said anything. I needed to be sure, and I needed to do this myself. Not as your wife asking for protection, but as the woman you married, the one who sees problems and solves them. Adrian kissed her, deep and thorough and full of promise. The woman I married is extraordinary. I'm sorry I ever let you forget that. That evening, as they gathered in the drawing room at Blackthorne Hall, Adrian with baby Edward in his arms, Rowan reading aloud from a book of adventures, Kit sketching her family with careful concentration, Rosalind felt the final piece of herself settle into place. She wasn't the governess playing at being a countess. She was Rosalind Blackthorne, and she had earned every inch of her position through courage, intelligence, and a refusal to be diminished by other people's limitations. The scandal would fade. Society would move on. But this, her family, her home, her place in the world, this was forever. She had walked into Blackthorne Hall with nothing but a battered valise and desperate hope. She was leaving with everything that mattered. And when Rowan looked up from his book and said, "Mother, what happens next in the story?" Rosalind smiled. "Whatever we decide happens next. That's the best part about writing your own ending. My dear viewers, if you've made it to the end, you've given me something precious, your time, your attention, your heart. I won't take it for granted. If Rosalind's courage inspired you, if Adrian's redemption touched you, if this story made you feel something real, please rate this story in a scale of 1 to 10 and don't leave without subscribing. It takes 1 second, but it means a lot to me. Thank you for letting me share these stories with you. Thank you for being part of Duke's Royal Library. Until next time, keep believing in love that conquers all.